If you weren't a golfer, you would assume, quite rightly, that the closer to the green you get, the easier the shots become. But we both know that's not the case. As golfers, we know that sometimes the hardest shots, the ones we struggle with the most, are those when we're closest to the green. But in this video, I'm going to share with you 5 really simple tips that have helped me, have helped hundreds, if not thousands of golfers I've worked with. Now, the 5th one is probably the one that has the biggest influence on your chipping, and it's the one that is invisible to see. So make sure you stay tuned for that one, and let's dive into the first one now. That's a pretty terrible result. I reckon that's still 12 feet short. And that wasn't a bad chip, but it was probably the wrong club. So tip number 1, I'm going to call share the love around. Don't use the same club for all of your chip shots. It's going to limit you. That wasn't a bad shot, but from here, 56 degree, a little bit of spin, soft greens, probably wasn't the best club. Had I played that with the right club, I would have had a better result. Now, basically, every single time you hit a chip, it's going to be a different situation. It's going to be a different lie, different amounts of green to work with, and so you have to select the club that's going to do the job for you. So I have got a bag full of tools. It makes sense to use them all. So pitch and wedge, I think, is probably the best option from there. So we're going to hit that one in a moment. But there's no reason why I can't chip with an 8 iron, and potentially even down to, if I can find it, a 6 iron. Let's go with that 6 iron and show you the kind of situation where this would be useful. So I could play exactly the same shot that I've just played, but look at the difference I'm going to get because it's a 6 iron. It goes super low, rolls, and if the flag on this particular occasion was right over on the far side of the green, that 6 iron would be the ideal club, but it's not. Pitch and wedge is probably the best option. When I look at changing the club, what I want to try and do is keep as many things the same as I can. So what's the difference between my 56 and my pitch and wedge? Well, loft, we want to use that loft to get the ball to do different things, but the length of the club is also different. But if we're looking to keep as many things the same as we can influence the length. So what I would be looking to do would be to say, okay, I'm going to take my 56 and I'm going to hold it pretty much at the top end of the club when I'm chipping with it. When I go to my pitch and wedge, I'm going to go down the handle a little bit, so that when I set up, it now feels exactly the same length as my 56 degree club. So as I go down in loft, I also want to go down the grip so that the club feels the same as it does, and I can take the same setup. So with my pitch and wedge, I'm taking exactly the same setup as I did with my 56. However, the better loft should give me a better result. A little bit lower ball flight, should take a little bit of break, and a much, much better result. Not a better chip, that's the key. It wasn't a better chip, it was a better club choice. So share the love around, use all of the clubs in your bag. Setup for success. This one, so important. Setup here is probably, potentially more important than any of the clubs that you use. Let me explain why. It's a short motion. We know that. You know, the club isn't going to be moving particularly far back or through. So if I don't stand the ball correctly, I can't fix it. There's no time in the golf swing for me to overcome or change any of the positions that I've got. That's not always the case with my full swing. You know, if I stand there with a 7 iron, I've got my weight too far back, I've actually got a fair bit of time that I can change that and move into the right position. That doesn't happen with these clubs. So it's really, really important that we start from the right position. There's 3 things that I want you to focus on. 2 of those are looking from the face on, and then the other one is from this down the line. So the first thing, and bearing in mind we're talking about real short chips around the greens here, you can see the shot that I'm faced with. I want you to think about the grip end of the club, the buttons or your sternum, and having both of those slightly in front of the golf ball. So as I set up here, I'm going to let the club hang from my buttons, and you can see how that hangs just in front of the golf ball, provided I'm pretty face onto that camera. Only just, and then the handle or the grip end of the club would also be directly under my sternum and in front of the golf ball. What that does is it puts a little bit of shaft lean in there, and it allows me to create a really good relationship around the golf ball. Notice to do that, I would just stand really naturally, really comfortably, and just bend forward. I've got no excessive tilts, I've got no excessive movements forward or back. It's just a really nice natural standing position. I tip over, and I just want to make sure that my sternum and the grip end of the club are in front of the golf ball. The second thing is I want to have a little bit of weight on this lead side, on my left side. Again, we can't move it there in the golf swing. We need to have it there at impact, so it makes sense that we start with it there. Now, how much is going to be different for each golfer. It's going to be a feel-based thing, but we'll be looking at around about 60%. So you can just go ahead and stand here, feel 50-50, tip forward, little bit of weight onto that lead side, and there is my pretty nice relationship around the golf ball. Raise it up. This is our third point into the setup. We want to raise the handle and stand in much closer to the golf ball. So if I took my setup to this golf ball here, this would be pretty much the distance that I would stand from this golf ball if I was trying to hit my 52-degree 100, 120 yards, which for me would be a full swing. But when I'm chipping, I want to raise the handle up. And when I do that, I then have to stand in closer in order to accommodate that. Why do I do that? Well, as we raise the handle up, there's two things that happen. Number one, the club moves straighter back, straighter through. It also works a little bit more upwards, a little bit more downwards. That helps us with strike. And the other thing is it reduces the amount of face rotation. As I lower the handle and stand further away, the club face opens more going back, closes more coming through. It's harder to control the direction. If you're wanting to try and hold a few of these shots, standing close really helps. The face will still be rotating back, still be rotating through, but it'll be far less. It also helps get the toe a little bit lower, which can help you with your interaction with the ground. So we've got our setup from face on, and then the final point here will be to raise it up, walk in a little bit closer, and it also gives you that sensation that you can have a little bit more control over the shot. It feels a little bit more like a finesse shot, and it feels a little bit more like you're in control of the golf club and the shot itself. That one, let's go up a little bit short. I need to learn my own lessons. That was a 52, and we've already established that pitching wedge is the right club from here. Quick one, hope you're enjoying the video, but I just want to let you know about a new video series which is live on my website at the moment. It's called the Short Game Toolbox, and it is going to transform your shots around the green. It's a really simple, easy to follow system which allows you to hit any shot that you can imagine around the green from any given situation and any given lie. And there is currently a special offer. If you head over to my website, you can click the link up here, watch the trailer, find out what's involved, and if you use the code LAUNCH10 at checkout, it's going to give you a special discounted rate. Right, back to the video. Wrists are not your enemy. What was I told as a junior golfer for chipping? No wrists. Take the hands out of it, no wrists. And I still hear that time and time again. And to an extent it's true, but that concept, that idea can actually really hold you back. Let's explain why. If I take my setup as I want to, and I have a little bit of body pivot, which I want to, and my grip pressure is nice and light, and that's really, really key for the short game, a little bit of wrist action is absolutely fine, and it's actually encouraged. And it helps you stay relaxed. What I see all too often is, if I took my setup to this golf ball, a golfer who's trying to limit the wrists will grip the club too hard. They'll lock the wrists in place. That tension will go up through their arms, into the shoulders, and they often have chipping motions that look a little bit like this. There was definitely no wrist in that shot, but look at the result, terrible. And it probably looked a little bit wooden and a bit stiff and didn't have a lot of flow and a lot of rhythm. That's never going to be good for your chipping. Those things that we just said there are really, really important. So if I stood up and faced the camera, and I kept the grip of the club pointing at my belly button, and I just moved the club back a little bit and through a little bit, this would be a little bit of wrist action. This is absolutely fine for your chipping. And if you think about a nice light grip pressure where I've got soft arms and my wrists are soft, as I make a little bit of movement with my body, there's going to be a little bit of flow to that golf club. Why would we not want this in our chipping motion? It keeps it really rhythmical, it keeps it feeling smooth, there's no real application of speed, there's no hit. All of those things are really, really beneficial when you're chipping, and especially as you start to increase the distance, you actually need a little bit of wrists to get the golf ball there. So as I hit this little shot here, you might see a little bit of wrist action going back, a little bit going through, but that's absolutely fine. I'm just letting the wrists work. I'm not trying to lock them in place and keep them incredibly stiff. A little bit of wrists, and that's going to release nicely. Up and in. This is our next point, and it refers to the movement of the club head. Obviously incredibly important. We want to strike the ball well, we want to control the direction, and so we have to control the movement of the club head. What should it do? Well, I would like it to move generally a little bit more up, going back, and then on the way down and through, a little bit more in. Let me explain what I mean. Notice how I've got an alignment stick in the ground here. It's on a relatively shallow angle, and when we look from down the line, it's basically on my toe line, just target side of the ball. Now, if I set up to this, and I've got my pitching wedge here, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to see a poor chipper have the club move too much inside going back, so the club moves behind me too early. And when it does that, it stays too low to the ground. When it stays too low to the ground, it's really hard to get the attack angle that we need. And very often from there, there's an attempt to move the club head very much down towards the target. Now, you can go ahead and do that if you want, but you are going to chip terribly. It's almost, I'm going to say, almost impossible to hit good shots. So in too early, down towards the target line, well, that was a shank. I wasn't trying to hit a shank, but that was a shank. It's just incredibly difficult. Now, if we want to hit shots towards a hole that go straight, it kind of makes sense that the club should move in that direction. It should move straight towards the target, but it shouldn't do that. This alignment stick is really going to help you. I'm going to take some practice swings here. And what I'm looking for is, I'm looking for the club to move a little bit straighter back. It will arc to the inside, but a little bit straighter. And then as I rotate and pivot through, notice how my club shaft made contact with the alignment stick. So the club was moving more to the inside on the way through. Now, why is it moving to the inside? Well, it's not because I'm dragging it in this way. It's very simply because as I'm going through, I'm adding some rotation. My body rotation is what lets that club move more to the inside. So this is a great little station. You can make some little practice swings, and then you can go ahead and just hit a couple of chips where you feel like the club moves towards the alignment stick. Pretty terrible result, and I'm sure we can agree, a pretty terrible chipping motion. Pretty common to see that. So when I see that, where is that fault? Where does it start? Well, I call that the hidden fault, because I think very often that starts in here. The distance between your ears, such an important part of the golf swing, often not talked about. Why is it the hidden fault? Well, for me, that stems from a golfer who potentially doesn't want to hit the ground. There's not a lot of confidence in hitting the ground. There's often a belief that the club shouldn't hit the ground, or there's maybe a history of the club hitting the ground and having some poor results. Let's think about the setup that we spoke about previously. You know, we had our sternum slightly in front of the ball, we had a little bit of weight forward, we had a little bit of shaft lean. All of those things suggest that the club will hit the ground. So we've got a setup which means the club will hit the ground. If in here, in your mind, if your concept is the club shouldn't hit the ground, you've got a massive conflict, because your technique is suggesting something's going to happen, and your mind is telling you that shouldn't happen. And what happens is we get that. We get a setup, the club goes up, it approaches the ground, this thing gets involved and says don't hit the ground, and you pull the arms away, or you jump up, or you do some sort of movement that we don't need, and we get terrible, terrible results. When chipping, when hitting all your shots around the green, the club should hit the ground. It has to hit the ground. I've got the blast sensor on this club. Let me hit a shot and we'll look at some data. You're going to see a negative attack angle. Okay, pull that to the left, but the club is going downwards. Have a look at that data there. Minus says the club is going downwards. I have to allow for that. But notice on all of these shots that I'm hitting, there's no divot, because we can hit down and still use the correct part of the golf club. That's really important. So watch when I take my practice swings. My concept is, can I land the club on the ground? Land it on the ground, land it on the ground, land it on the ground, land it on the ground. Those practice swings are for me to gauge where the ground is, get my swing radius, get the club to land exactly where I need it to land. Once I've done a couple of practice swings and I feel confident as to where the ground is, and I've almost done my little calibration, I can then start to look at the shot that I'm hitting. Where do I want this ball to land? But all the time, my club is landing on the ground. And then when I go in, what's my concept? Well, my setup says the club's going to land on the ground. If I try to get the club to land on the ground, what happens is, guess what? We get a pretty decent result. Nearly, you need to roll a little bit more. So you have to be accepting that the club is going to hit the ground. That's what your setup suggests. This in here is so important. If you get that right and you have the right concepts and ideas, your chipping can go right up to the top level.